So I think my Norwegian Lutheran grandmother got it. Maybe your grandma was like this too. Whether one set of grandkids showed up on Sunday or all of them, in a half an hour she could have the table full of food, not even break a sweat. I think she must have had an endless pantry because she never ran out of anything. It was always something there for us to eat. Well, you know, as we take a look at that kind of hospitality, that's one of the things that I always thought it was when we were growing up. That's what I called that, was hospitality. In fact, at our house, somebody came to visit. One of the kids would say, "You want a beer?" That's kind of what happened at our house. Well, one time, the sister, who was the principal of our grade school, came. And she came and sat down at the kitchen table, and my little brother Willie said, "Sister, you want a beer?" And Mom almost fainted. And so Sisters thought for a minute, and she said, "Well, I do believe I will have a beer." And Dad almost fainted. But that's not necessarily what we're talking about here. Hospitality, biblical hospitality, has a different feel to it, okay? Sometimes we think about hospitality as putting on the dog and getting out the linen and doing all that. And sometimes, you've probably had the experience, I certainly have, I've been in situations where they did all those things and it was really uncomfortable. They were doing all the right things and you just think, I can't wait to get out of this place, okay? There's a really good book. I don't recommend books very often, but there's a book by Benedictine Father Daniel Homan called Radical Hospitality. And it really, to me, put into perspective what I think my experience, particularly in some of Dad's family, has been about, but it really is what this biblical hospitality is about. Because he defines this kind of hospitality as making space in your life for someone. Making space in your life for someone. So it's not necessarily about the externals, okay? But it's about making space. And the three examples that we have from the scriptures this weekend are great. So we have this first reading from 2 Kings. So there's this prophet, kind of the holy guy, who has this regular route. So he stops in and has dinner at this house. And so after he leaves, the woman says, "Gee, you know, this is kind of a holy guy. He comes by here all the time. Let's make a space for him." So they did it on the roof. They got a bed and a chair and a lamp. You know, it's just a place for him to kind of hang out. So they made space for him. They actually made a change in their lives so that it would accommodate him. So we hear what happens next time he comes around, and, you know, he's enjoying their hospitality. And so he says to his servant, "You know, gee, I wonder if I can do anything for this lady?" And he goes, "Well, you can. You know, her husband's pretty old and she doesn't have a son yet." So he says, "Well, call her up here." So she comes up and he says, "You know, next year at this time you're going to have a son." Now, most of the time we don't do things thinking about reward because it's really not the way we're supposed to live. However, when it comes to hospitality, it's clear over and over and over again that the good we do comes back to us. The good we do comes back to us. So if we do something for others, and so that's why in this gospel that we had today from Matthew, might seem like it's not connected, but it really is. We hear this first part, "Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. Son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me." So we hear all this unworthiness stuff, but then the next section talks about rewards. Now, I don't know how much you read the Bible, but in the Bible, at the beginning of each of these sections, in bold print, it tells us what the theme of that section is. And in this particular one from Matthew, it says, this is the conditions of discipleship. So remember, because you and I were baptized, we are baptized into being Jesus' disciples, okay? So discipleship, Jesus tells us what those parameters are. Jesus tells us what it means to be a disciple. And so I'm telling you this morning that one of the fundamental things about being a disciple is being hospitable, is making space in our lives for others. There's the example hanging on the front wall, okay? And so we hear in this one, he said, "Whoever gives only a cup of water to one of these little ones to drink because he's a disciple will not lose his reward." Will not lose his reward. And so taking a look at this idea about discipleship and hospitality is something that all of us need to do. Now, this is why I go back to saying that Grandma Haugen got it. And it didn't have to do with the fact that she could fill a table. One winter night, after Grandpa died, there was a knock at the door, and she went to the door, and it was Thelma. And Thelma was from her church. And it was a terrible night, and she said, "Thelma, what are you doing out?" And she had to take a cab to come across town to Grandma's house, okay? She said, "Well, can I come in?" And she said, "Well, sure." So she sits down on the couch, and she gives Grandma this present. And Grandma, being Grandma, starts to cry. She said, "Well, Thelma, I don't have anything for you." And so she opened it up, and it was a crocheted doily about this big around out of gold metallic thread. It was spectacular. And Grandma said, "Thelma, what are you doing? What are you giving this to me for?" And the lady looked her in the eye and she said, "Marie, you are the only woman in our church who will talk to me." They had a quilting group that met weekly at First Lutheran. And they would bring their sack lunches and they would work on their quilts. And, Grandma, in telling me this story, she said, "Well, Johnny, she does kind of smell. And she's a little odd sometimes, but she said, I'm odd a little bit too." Oh, I would never agree with Grandma on something like that. But she said, everybody needs to have a friend. So she said, I always eat my lunch with her. That's hospitality. That's making space in your life for others. Now, I just have a little confession to make, though, that maybe you don't realize about hospitality. And this is the deal. Hospitality is a pain in the neck. Real biblical hospitality is a pain in the neck. Do you know why? Because you are not in control of it. It shows up on your doorstep. So I know people who love to entertain, and like that British sitcom that has the lady who's planning these overdone dinner parties all the time. I know people that plan stuff for weeks and weeks, and everything has to be just perfect, and you're kind of uncomfortable. It's like taking your kids to somebody's house who has white carpeting. You're going to go and it's really not fun. Radical hospitality, these are the people who just show up at the wrong time when you have a million other things to do. You really don't have time for this today, and that's when they show up. Because you know what? That's when Jesus shows up. At the wrong time. And so it's the God bless caller ID, ding-a-ling-a-ling. You go, "Oh, not him, not today." Radical hospitality is paying attention. And frankly, folks, most of the time what people need is not very much. They don't want to be fixed. They don't want to have any great things done in their life. They just want a little of your time. They want to be listened to. That's all. That's what radical, making space in your life for somebody. That's what it's called. Putting ourselves aside and making sure that we're available to be Christ to others. The Benedictines have as one of their mottos that they live their life by, receive all guests as Christ. And so we don't know when we're entertaining somebody or paying attention to somebody, it could be Christ, huh? It could be Christ that we're paying attention to. And particularly if it's somebody who's really aggravating or annoying, I know that they don't belong to this parish, but they do in all the other ones. Maybe that person who's really annoying, that person is probably your ticket to heaven. St. Jose Escriva said that. Pay attention to the person that annoys you. They may very well get you to heaven. That's what this hospitality is about. So I think it's significant that we take a look at that in our own lives and what's our attitude towards that. Because we live in a day and age when we tend to make decisions by saying things like, "I don't have time for him right now. I can't do this." Well, I don't think that when Jesus' time came, he said, I can't get this into my schedule this week, this passion, death, and resurrection. Can we do this at another time? And so the scriptures are full of examples of that hospitality, and it does have its rewards. That's not why we do it. It just happens. God confirms that in our lives when we take the time to be hospitable. So, folks, that's why we do this dumb business about, at the beginning of Mass, hi, how are you? Welcome, That's why we do that. And I know that every parish that we've started that at, you know, the first couple Sundays, you stand in the back and people are going, well, for God's sakes, I know this guy for 45 years. Why should I say hello to him at the beginning of Mass? You know. Because you might not be next to that guy one time. I remember when we started that in Farley, and Farley rolled their eyes just like you guys did. And one weekend, my folks came, and they were sitting over about where Hughes Lukens are now, and I didn't tell anybody they were here. They're sitting over there, and so stand up and greet, you know, so they're, you know, doing that, and all of a sudden there's this big commotion around my folks, you know. So of course they're saying, well, where are you from? We're from Waterloo. What are you doing here? Well, we're visiting our son. Who's your son? Well, he's back there, you know, and oh, you know, so there's this big hubbub, and one of the persons that they were talking to was one of the guys who was going, well, did he learn his lesson? He thought my folks were pretty nice. But you know what? It underscores a very basic fundamental truth, though, and it's this. If you study some of the best things that are being written right now, best practices about church, about why people don't go, do you know that the number one reason is not because of dogma or doctrine or the Pope or we hate the music or you hate the pastor? Do you know the number one reason why people don't go to church in this country, of the stuff that I've read? People hate to go to church alone. They don't want to go alone. And so the churches that have worked on hospitality, where somebody who's a loner can feel like they're connected and somebody talks to them, those are the churches that grow. It's not about what the church teaches, that's secondary. It's about the relationship, about how we are with each other. How we are with each other. And so people will say, oh, you know, I went over to that church, and, you know, but, you know, nobody talked to me when I was there. Well, we have to think about what that means. Because it's kind of like going to the Last Supper and sitting around the table with the disciples, but them not having any conversation. It would be ludicrous. Well, that's what this is, folks. Here's the table. This is the Last Supper. And so how we are with each other is really, really very significant for us. So this is a great time of year for us to be thinking about that. What we think about hospitality. How do we go out of our ways to make people feel welcome? How do we go out of our ways to find out about people and where you're from? And, you know, and one of the churches that I experienced that in, I think I told you before, at the Black Parish in the north part of St. Louis. And if they see somebody who is new, and they'll go introduce themselves, and one of the first things, this is not the pastor or the welcoming committee, this is the parishioners, they'll go up and say, you know, if you don't have a church yet, we'd love to have you join here. The parishioners do that. You can't get into that church if they don't know you without having multiple people saying, oh, what are you doing here? I mean, they noticed me partly because I was white, I understand, but they wanted to know all about me, how long I was going to be there. They were very, very interested. Next time I came, they came back. Oh, yeah, you're from Iowa, aren't you? Yeah. So we ask Christ to, first of all, broaden our awareness of those people who are at the margin, those people who might be loners, those people who might not be connected. Church is about connections. It's not about rules. It's about community, not about the catechism. We need to kind of change our focus of what our emphasis is. That's what Pope Francis is trying to get us to do, is to become more human, huh? So we pray for that awareness, the courage, and the humility to go out of our lives to make space in our lives for others. That's biblical hospitality.